All right, welcome to Nested Loops. We're starting up a new book, Shape Up, by Ryan Singer of Basecamp, of course. Um, Roughly for people new to the format, of which I see a new face there, but supposedly some more. We're pretty much just going to cover the book. We tend to have a rotating reader who prepares the lesson and does a little presentation. And please do discuss. That's probably the best part. You'll benefit the best if you actually pre-read and then discuss. But I think the discussion is always the best. It kind of represents it a lot there. We're going to try to figure out the right. I'm going to go and share my screen, and I'll start. Please chime in at any time. We can have discussion at the end. Discussion during the time also, I think, makes it easier to stay. You might remember something at the beginning of the thing and then forget it at time to speak. So feel free to interrupt.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm going to slightly adjust it so it fills content. Okay, so shape up, stop running in circles, and ship what matters. I prepared the first two chapters, and we'll see if we get that far. All right, so chapter 1 is the introduction. So it starts out with growing pains, and so here's a general thing. Here are some struggles for growing teams. The team members feel like projects go on and on. There's no end in sight. I think we can all have appreciated this at some point. Product managers can't find the time to think strategically about the product. So one side, the other side. Founders ask themselves, why can't we get features out the door like we used to in the early days? So clearly this is, Basecamp's own words, but I think growing teams all feel these. So a little history on Basecamp itself. It was a tool they built for themselves in 2003, and they were a web consultancy. They needed a centralized place to see work, discuss, and know what to do next. And as it turned out, many other people had the same problem of info slipping through the cracks, and they talk about, clients and people on the team and discussing, and so of course, obviously, enough people bought this that they could become millionaires with such a product, so they did well. So the very first version was built by 3 people. Jason Fried is the founder of the company, and it was his design vision. DHH, who went on to be famous for creating Rails, actually by extracting out the framework from Basecamp. So he's famous, and all us Ruby programmers all mostly have jobs because of him. And Ryan Singer, the author of this book, was at that time just a web designer, and so he kind of was intermediate between those two. So they had limited time, starting from the prototypes to the launch. So between July 2003 and launch in February 2004, DHH only worked 10 hours a week. He was going to college at that time, and he allocated this. And this is a story, if you followed DHH way back then, he mentions this, and we're going, God, you built Basecamp and extracted Rails in 10 hours a week. We are all wowed by that ability. But due to the time limitations, he had to be very deliberate. Right, and so there's the term hammering. Hammering scope to fit the time budget was born in this environment. All right, so now we're talking Ryan. So Ryan had widened his skills. He learned programming from DHH and Ruby on Rails, and via that learned about software techniques that they use to tame complexity, to include factoring, abstraction, separation of concerns. So given that he had his design background and now working on Basecamp, the programming experience, he wondered if he could apply these software development principles to how you design and manage the product, which in a lot of ways kind of mirrors a lot of Agile, and is clearly what Kent Beck does. So they got to test this idea of applying these ideas, software ideas, to design. In 2009, at that time, they hired more programmers. They decided to offer 4 software as a service products. They wanted to bundle all these products together with a single sign-on. So you can imagine it was a massive undertaking with what he calls treacherous user flows. And that's really, if you know Ryan's work, that's his focus, to get the user flows working and the UI and the UX very clear. So that was his perspective. So he was the designer and the product manager for this. He prototyped these breadboarding and scope mapping techniques in the book at this time to manage the complexity. So, growing Basecamp. So they had good results doing this. So again, in 2012, they redesigned Basecamp from scratch for the Basecamp 2.0. Oh, hey, Rob texted me. He says it's full. So I think we have hit some kind of full limitation on the, let's see what he texted me, what he says. Oh, there is a limit to how many people. Getting initially comfortable, I guess it is. Guess so. I'm going to have to figure out another way.
Terry dropped off.
Oh, Terry dropped out. Oh. All right, there's a limit. So I don't know what said limit is. But Diego got on and Terry dropped off. All right, where was I?
Basecamp 2.0.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Here we go. Well,
Jeff, you are muted.
okay. All right. So Basecamp 2.0. So a lot of scope, but the process went surprisingly smooth. 2005. By then, they had a core team, and they'd done 2 big things, so they were well versed in the process. But it was hard for them to articulate this process to new hires. So, product team had quadrupled, and they were all remote. So I have a number of annotations here, Agile, with a colon something. I know the guys at Basecamp love to say, "Oh, we don't do that trendy Agile stuff. We do our stuff." But I found that a lot of these ideas are exactly Agile ideas. So, this one here. Sprints and iteration. This was a core cornerstone of Agile, of fixed time boxings. Though they do it a little different, but repeating cycles of ad hoc. Okay, so they formalized the pitching and bidding processes, and we'll learn more about that later. They switched from design and product management to product strategy. They needed a new language like shaping for upfront design work, and they set boundaries to reduce risks on projects before they are committed to teams. I should let people know that they can do the live stream. Excuse me a second, I'm gonna jump on Meetup and let people know that the YouTube live stream can be accessed. It'll be delayed by like 5 seconds or so. And so you'll excuse me as I figure out this link. And I may feedback because I'm trying to share this. Okay, I'm trying to jump onto, pardon me for this. So that it seemed like limitation is 10, so for the late. Hangout is for, all right. Okay, so people on live stream can join, but obviously they can't. All right. Okay, they won't be able to discuss. So I should probably make a thing. If you want to discuss, join the Hangout, and if you just want to listen, join the live stream. Okay, so I'm going to continue here. All right, so the book itself is 2 books in one. First one, he says, is a book of basic truths, a basic language to describe and deal with risks, uncertainty, and challenges. And the other part is the outline, the specific process they use to progress this at their scale. So Okay, so let's get an overview of the main ideas. To start with, they have the 6-week cycle. It is long enough to build something meaningful, but short enough to fill the deadline. So we need to use time wisely. Majority of features are built and released in one 6-week cycle. So this gets a little closer to Scrum and a little farther away from some of the more agile things there. The focus is at a higher level, and here's a quote by one of the people: if the product shifts after 6 weeks, we'll be really happy. We feel our time was well spent. So then we commit to this 6 weeks, and we leave the team alone to get it done. All right, shaping the work is the second idea there, and it's to shape the work before giving it to the team. A small senior group works in parallel to the cycle teams. They're the shapers. They define the key elements of the solution before they consider a project to be ready to bet on. And this maps kind of to the agile idea of a spike, defined at the right level of abstraction, which when you look at, especially the extreme programming, about how they feel a story card should be defined, it's concrete enough to know what to do, abstract enough to let the interesting details be worked out by the team. So this is a little different than Agile. They focus less on estimates and more on appetite. It's actually more their unique perspective on this one. So instead of how much time will it take, the question is how much time do we want to spend? And thus that kind of maps with appetite. How much is this feature worth? All right, and so you want to narrow down the product and the design to fit within the constraints of the appetite. Which actually sounds like a good approach to life in general. So making teams responsible. So the point here is to give full responsibility to the small team of designers and programmers. Allow them to define their own tasks, make adjustments to scope, and build vertical slices one slice at a time. Right, as this compares to how management is typically done, where a manager chops up the work and programmers act like ticket takers. And if I recall, the pros made them feel very robotic and factory automation like. And of course, more autonomous teams mean less time for the senior people to manage them, and then this gives them more time to shape up better projects. So it's kind of a self-feeding thing where when projects are better shaped, then the teams can work more autonomously. All right, so what risk are we targeting with this method? We are targeting the risk of not shipping on time at each step, and this is something that should appreciate to managers and stakeholders. The book is not about the risk of building the wrong thing, so we're not looking for that one. Ryan suggests the book Competing Against Luck to figure out what to build. That's also the basic tenet of lean startup. So it is important to be able to ship first. So we're going to work on that and then improve our discovery process, which is the other one. So if you have the best strategy but you can't act on it, what good is it? All right, so what do we want? We want to avoid getting stuck. We want to avoid getting bogged down with the last quarter's work. We don't want to waste time on unexpected problems. I think we felt the pain of these things. We don't like not being able free to do what you want to do tomorrow. And again, sounds like life. But this is how they're going to try to attack that one. So there's this idea of a circuit breaker. So they reduce the risk by capping their bets. And again, this is their metaphor, bets and pitches. So they cap it to 6 weeks, which, largely fits the idea of agile iterations in sprint, where they time box things and then reevaluate. Though their reevaluation is slightly different in that if their feature runs over, by default, it doesn't get an extension. So I think it's the exception that we extend it, where I think, at least for us, I can't speak for people not on my team, we tend to extend it until it gets done. So, and sometimes maybe we should think about that. All right, circuit breaker. So this gives you a circuit breaker, ensures you don't invest multiples of the original on appetite, the original appetite on concepts that need rethinking. So we reduce the risk by integrating design and programming earlier, and we don't build lots of disconnecting parts hoping they'll fit in. So, and again, they talk about build one, meaning full piece of the work end to end early, and then repeat vertical slices. Fits very strongly with BDD, making a cucumber feature and then delivering that vertical slice via TDD. You want to sequence. They tend, apparently it was only one sentence. They sequence the most unknown to least worrying some pieces. So they put the risk more up front apparently from this, and we'll find out more. Integrate as soon as possible. And this, maps to like Agile's continuous integration idea. All right, so how's the book organized? Part 1, shaping. This is the pre-work on the projects that before they consider them ready to schedule. So in here, we'll learn about techniques like breadboarding and fat marker sketching. And the point here is to keep the design at the right level of abstraction. Part 2, bedding. So this is how they choose among the projects and decide what to do. So I talked about that a little earlier. And kind of maps analogously to the planning game, sprint planning, where you assess what to do in the iteration. So it is kind of a reprioritization, though at this point it feels it's a different kind of granularity than at least how we do it, how we interpret sprint extreme programming, probably others. And then part 3 is the actual building, the expectation on team and special practices to discover what to do, how they integrate design and programming, how they track known and unknown aspects of the effort, how to make hard calls to finish the project at the time. I think this is something that could be quite valuable for us. I apparently have more bullets to scroll off the page, so I apologize. All right, part 2. So chapter 2, principles of shaping. All right, so in shaping the work, the key is to shape them to the right level. You'll see a picture shortly, but usually err on one side or the other. So here's their picture, abstract, shaped, concrete. So you want it the right level right there in the middle. That's the proper shaped level. Don't want it too abstract on the top, too concrete on the bottom. What happens when wireframes are too concrete? Well, when design leaders go straight to the wireframe high-level mock-ups, too much detail is specified too early. This leaves designers no room for creativity. So I imagine this is something that speaks to designers who don't feel they have room for creativity. Here's a quote for someone who worked in the process. It says, "I'll give a wireframe to my designer, and then I'm saying to her, I know you're looking at this, but that's not what I want you to design. I want you to rethink it." It's hard to do that when you're giving them this concrete thing. You sound sensible. So what does this entail exactly? You don't know enough information with vague words like that to know what the trade-offs are, what to include or leave out. Another quote, "You're solving a problem with no context, so you have to be a mind reader." It's like, we'll know it when we see it. Underspecified projects naturally go out of control because there are no scope boundaries. And again, I think managers, here's something that speaks to them. All right, case study. So the dot grid calendar. So version 3 of Basecamp was launched, and they didn't have a calendar. They had a schedule feature that listed events, but no calendar grid. So shortly after they launched, the customers started asking them for a calendar. So they had built calendars before in the previous versions, and they knew how complicated they could be. So what are some things that make a calendar complicated? Dragging and dropping events between cells to move them, wrapping multi-day events around the edge of the screen, different views for monthly, weekly, or daily timescales, dragging the edge of the event to change its duration, color coding events for different categories, handling different expectations for desktop versus mobile interactions. And so going back to these real quick. So I know something that's always been part of the whole Basecamp philosophy is making the features right so that the customers enjoy using them, as opposed to just throwing features in and, kind of the Microsoft Office thing, just jam more features in, kind of perspective. So this speaks to them. It's like, it's not that you can't do these, but doing them right, I think, is hard. All right, so there's a history with Basecamp calendars. Their previous versions had calendars, but they found only 10% of the customers use these features. So they didn't really have the appetite of spending 6 months building, a full-featured camera for a calendar for people that 90% didn't use. So if they could satisfy all these customers in a single 6-week cycle, they had the appetite for such. They're open to that. So you could build 1/10th of a calendar in 6 weeks. So what 10th would that be? And that's the point of the shape up. So dot grid was their solution. After some research, they narrowed it down to a use case they wanted to solve. They were inspired by calendars on phones. So they would have a 2-month read-only grid view. Every day with an event would have a dot for each. A list of the events would appear below the calendar. Clicking on a day with a dot would scroll those events into view. So it's not a full-featured calendar. You're not dragging events between days. You're not spanning multi-day events across the grid. Just repeat the dots. No color coding for categories on the events. We're comfortable with this limited feature set because we understand the use case of what people actually want in this case. So here's the rough sketch that came up. The fidelity is used to define the solution. So you can see here, we got the 2 grids, left month, right month, those little dots there. And then the events below, you click on the dots and it scrolls those into place. So, things to notice. How rough it is. How many details are left out. So here the designer has a lot of room to interpret, but the idea is still specific. It's how it works, what needs to be built, what's in and out of scope. So when they launched it, it looked like this. You can see pretty much, the calendar left, right. You can see various dots there and, events and the picture. The original picture actually scrolls down with a lot more events and days. So if I could click on that, I guess this would happen. He clicked on the 23 and then the August 23 shows you the events here. And that's the dot grid. All right, so what are the properties of shape work? So number 1, it's rough. So if we go back to the original sketch, it was obviously unfinished, but we see the open spaces where the contributions can go. So this is the point for the designer going, got it, I've got the idea, I know what I need to do, and I can bring my creative muscle to play here. It's if you specify things too early, too fine, too early, then everyone commits to the wrong details. Designers and programmers need room to apply their own judgment expertise when they discover the real trade-offs. So here's the thing is we will discover things as we build it. And that's kind of why it is sometimes not fruitful to pre-specify things, because when it comes time to it, you need to figure out what trade-offs to go with. Number 2, the work is solved. So it's been thought through despite being rough and unfinished. All the main elements of the solution are there at the macro level, and they connect each other. All right, we're not specified out to the individual tasks, but the overall solution is spelled out, right? And, so you could get surprises, but there's a clear direction of what to do. So this is something they're going to address. They open questions, rabbit holes they could have seen have been removed to just reduce risk, so that'll be part of the process we'll learn. 3, it's bounded. So shape work shows what not to do, when to stop, and again, we have a specific appetite. How much time are we allowed to spend on this feature? When you're competing on time, you have to limit the scope. So shape work is rough. It leaves room to resolve the details there. So all right, solution and boundaries, reduce risk and channel team's efforts. Okay, so now we'll talk about shapers. Who shapes? So shaping is creative and integrative. It requires combining interface ideas and tech possibilities along with business processes, priorities. So you either need a generalist who is familiar with these 3 things, or you have to collaborate with the necessary knowledge. And Ryan considers this primarily design work. It is, and this speaks to his general focus, which is, what does the interaction design viewed from the user's perspective. What does the feature do, how it works, and where it fits into the existing flows. So shapers don't need to be programmers, but they do need to be tech literate. right? They need to be able to judge what's possible, easy or hard. And if you know about how the system works, it helps you see opportunities or obstacles. So you have to be strategic. Setting the appetite and coming up with a solution requires being critical about the problems. What, why, and what counts. What and why, what counts as success. Oh, gosh. Kind of wrote that sentence kind of odd, and I'm not exactly certain what I mean exactly about that one. Which customers are effective? What is the cost of this versus something else? So there's a strategy. We could build this or this, and I think this speaks a little to probably how they pick their pitches and bidding. All right, so then there's 2 tracks in shaping, but they start off with a caveat. You can't really schedule shaping work because it's risky and unknown by nature. But then there's 2 tracks. So the shaping track and there's the building track. So during the 6-week work cycle, the building track builds the previously shaped work while the shapers work on the future cycle features. The shaping track is kept private and not shared until commitment has been made to bet on it. This allows shapers to put work in process things, I misspelled it, on the shelf or drop it if it's not working out. All right, steps to shaping. 1, set boundaries. Figure out how much time the raw ideas are worth and how to define the problem. We want to rough out the elements, sketch them at a higher level than wireframes to both move fast and explore the wide range of possibilities. So it's clear to me they don't want to overcommit on this part of the phase. The output is an idea that solves the problems within the appetite, but without all the fine details. So we want to address risks and rabbit holes, and they mentioned that earlier. Amend the solution, cut things out, specify details of tricky spots to avoid wasting time. And then they'll write the pitch. When the pitch is shaped enough, we package it in a formal write-up. This goes to the betting table for consideration. If it's picked up, this formal write-up can be reused to explain the project to the team. All right, so that covers the material. Our next session is about setting boundaries, which is the first step of this process. Let's open it up to any discussions, questions, or comments. And again, I think if I don't figure out a different solution with a bigger audience, I will probably ask those who want to discuss to come on the Hangout and those who only want to listen to go on the live stream. So please let me hear what things you have to say. Anyone?
Hey, I just wanted to say a quick note about the Hangout situation. And I think right now during COVID, if you use Google's new thing called Meet,
Yep.
it's at least 250 people minimum.
Oh, okay, I'll try that. I'll look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think they're replacing the old-fashioned Hangouts with Meet.
All right, cool. Well, any comments since I got you?
I don't think so. So I read this when it first came out. I think a few changes have been made since then. I'm part of a very small business. You know, we have like just a handful of developers, really only 3 full-time developers. So I'm trying to apply these things to a small team. And I think there's a little note at the end now that says, hey, if you're small, here's how to kind of adapt these things to your size.
Mm-hmm. So did you have any success adopting it earlier?
We did so our team did like 1 good cycle, according to most of the shape up stuff, and then things got busy, and now we're like off the wagon, so to speak. So we're trying to reset. Like the book says, dedicate a team. And never, like I said, there's really 3 to 4 of us, and if something happens, it's us.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. They address that in the end of the book, but but there's still, of course, plenty of this that is relevant, right? So like shaping things, trying to find the risks, trying to outline the don't want to get ahead of things, but the rabbit holes, what areas are no-goes, so that you don't get into building something that could be done later, so
if you're not doing the cycle, what are you doing now? Like, what is your development? It's just kind of ad hoc.
Very much ad hoc. It's like, so, but we have or at least because I have read into this stuff and felt the pain, I know, all right, this feature we've been working on, we're at the point where we need to just start cutting scope so we can get it out in a couple weeks, basically. But it's kind of where we're at with one particular project. It's like, okay, it's good enough. Let's start cutting things. Let's start acting as if we're going to release this week or next week, and start kind of wrapping it up, and then we'll kind of come back at it afterwards. So, but yeah, very much ad hoc. Partly
cool.
because I am the product manager, if there is one, and I am the designer, if there is one, and I am the lead programmer, if there is one, right? I'm putting all the different hats.
Well, you sound like you're that one guy when we said about, the shaper's got to be technical and know your business priorities as well as the stuff. So you sound like you're qualified for
I'm that
position.
guy that would be the shaper, but I'm also the one that needs to put my head down and program a lot of the time. So
you can't do the 2-track.
My natural inclination is either I could spend a day just planning, or I could get this thing done, and this is vague and this is concrete. I know I need to do this. I'm just going to do this. So I end up just programming instead of planning. So that's my personal challenge. is to balance that better.
Right. Okay. Oh, cool. I mean, by contrast, we do agile with 1 week iterations, and we've learned the value of making things regular.
Yeah.
Right. And we're pretty, because they have a 6-week cycle. Scrum does a 1 month cycle. We do 1 week iterations, so we try our best to deliver. Obviously, we can't do the big slice, like the slice that they want. They're talking like a whole feature. Well, per agile thing, do parts of things, and sometimes when you have a big project, we're constantly doing small things before we unveil the big thing. So I know I'm hoping, like a question I'd like to ask anyone joining this is, what are you trying to get out of the process? I think what we do works pretty good. We kind of have a bit of a 2-track. We do have some shaping done in parallel, and then because we have we have enough manpower to actually, week in and week out, we have a team doing the stuff. The problem that Eric has, where he's the coder and the shaper, is probably tough. We have that thing. I don't know, some of the things we put out, we can apply this. So I think some of the pick and scope, and I like this idea of appetite, though I don't know that we can get away with that one. But we might build some internal projects. I think that we could maybe use this process almost directly. I think what we're doing works pretty good, though I think there's certain obvious ideas we can pull from this. But the regular thing, like when you talked about falling off the wagon, that's the worst thing. That's like dieting. Well, I ate paleo for a week, and now I eat everything. Like,
I'll just say real quick, I used to work at Red Hat, and I was just a software developer in the trenches, and we had sprints, 2-week sprints, and to be honest, it didn't even feel like it felt like just a thing that was was going on. We're in this sprint, and that means next week we're going to have the sprint meeting, and everyone's going to talk about the stuff that they shipped, which was cool. But it never, to me, felt like, I need to box what I'm working on and I need to shape it, like the book says, I need to scope hammer. It was just, if I don't ship it this sprint, the next sprint, what'll happen.
Yeah.
So I feel like the thing that resonates with me or attracts me to the shape up thing is the focus on scope hammering. It's like, okay, fit this into the time box. Now, I realize that it might not have been proper agile or whatever, but that's what it felt like to me. Was just, the sprint is a thing that's happening, but it doesn't make a big difference in my life. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I mean, I think that happens to everyone. Oh, it didn't fit sprint, so we do the other one. This is unfortunately endemic to us pretty heavily. So I like this idea of host scope hammering, and I also like the. I'm curious to see what they do, because he says by default they do the circuit breaker. Well, it didn't fit.
That's huge.
So we abandon. Well, 1 week it's hard for us to abandon, so we'll have to figure out what we do. But we do have the concept. Yep. We take the concept of, I guess their thing is an epic. The problem is we don't bind those epics as tightly as this. Maybe we can use their techniques to bind our epics tighter.
I think that circuit breaker idea is so huge. It means you don't just keep tacking on time. Just where I'm at right now, right? We didn't finish this week. We'll just keep tacking on time until he's like, wait a minute, we got to stop and ship. Whereas I think with that circuit breaker, it's kind of like a big deal. It's like, we didn't map this out right. It's going to go away if we don't. Like after a couple of circuits get broken, I feel like it would be ingrained, the whole system better. It would be like, okay, wait a minute. Now up front, we really need to plan it. Because I feel like I start planning something, trying to follow the shape up stuff. But I feel like, okay, it's kind of shaped up enough. I'm just going to get to programming, get to building. It's kind of my feeling. But then, you know what I'm saying? I think after a couple times where I ran into that circuit breaker, I'd be like, okay, next time I'm really going to shape this thing up and get it nailed down.
Anyway. The idea of this, maybe I misunderstood, but was the idea of the circuit breaker that if work was going over the 6 weeks that you just didn't do it? It literally, the work was like went away. It was like you're not.
The feature is gone. It's like we're moving on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that. So it'll come back to that betting table stage, and it'll be okay. Let's rethink this.
Oh, okay.
And let's rebet on this. Let's reshape it. But it might not win against something else that they want to build, right? So it's not, hey, we have half this done. Let's sink more time into it. That said, I know there's some place where they have this kind of hill chart thing in Basecamp. And like the first half of the hill, the going up the hill is figuring things out, and the second half of the hill is just executing. It's like we've got all the stuff figured out. We know we just need to build, right? So it's concrete. We have a sense of there's no unknowns. It's just we have a sense this is going to take another week or so. If everything is on that side of the hill of the downhill part, then they might give it some more time. I think they say in the book. But if stuff is still we ran into stuff that are unknowns, then the circuit breaker trips, and it's like, okay, we didn't plan this out because most of the stuff left is still unknown. We need to think about this again. But then they might go on to something else entirely.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, I was confused for a second because I thought they were suggesting that they just like threw away work. I was like,
yeah.
Well, the key
they kind of do, which is different to me from the sprint thing. When I was doing sprints, it was just I'll finish what I'm doing next sprint, and my thing probably took 3 sprints. But so what, right? There was no hammer. There was no hard edges. It was just my thing will take 3 or 4 sprints.
Right.
And that's probably not right. But
the key thing for their process is it doesn't come to the 6-week cycle if it hasn't been shaped.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time it comes there, it should fit.
It should fit, yeah.
Right. And versus I think what Eric's describing and what ends up happening to us a lot is we just roll into the next sprint. Yeah. Which actually in some cases we use Pivotal Tracker as our tool. And that's kind
Yeah,
of
I've used that before.
that's meant for to roll in and well, here's your velocity and blah blah blah.
Yep.
So it almost is designed for that. Just roll it over,
Yep.
right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you don't shape it, you can't expect it to finish in the 6 weeks. And that's, I guess, that's what makes it different than Agile.
Yeah, I think they've gone through enough cycles that they know they have a good sense. That's kind of what I was trying to say before. They've done enough of these cycles where I think they gave a couple examples of things that broke the circuit breaker. After you break that a couple times, like, wait a minute, we gotta change the shape of process and make it more, make it better. And then at so many times, but that, I think that goes to the whole appetite betting idea. It's like, we are going to risk this 6 weeks, and it's more of a risk if that 6 weeks goes down the drain, right? But it's also less of a risk because you said it's 6 weeks. It's not 8 weeks. It's not 12 weeks. It's not 6 months. It's just 6 weeks. If something really bad happens that, we really didn't see this coming, then, okay, we've potentially wasted 6 weeks, but we haven't wasted 6 months.
Yeah. Agile tries to do a similar thing about breaking the cards into something that's doable by the iteration. But it's a little, like, I want to say, lower level.
Yeah.
Can I get this in the iteration? That's one thing. From Ryan's thing is this thing the user cares about. So I think the thing is, for us, we get this little thing that fits in the iteration. That's one thing. And I want to say, probably for Red Hat, it's like, I don't know what you're working on. The kernel, this, that, something. It's not
it was a Rails app, actually, but yeah.
It's just like, it's just something you expect to kind of ooze out. When it's not this, like the dot grid. The dot grid is, look, I need a calendar. Well, what do you really want? Well, I just want to build this to see what's happening on what day and click on it. Okay, well, here's your feature. Here's 6 weeks. You look at, I imagine in general, like working for an OS system, it's like, oh, you know what, those big features aren't a 6 week thing. So then you just have many iterations until the thing happens.
That can definitely be a thing. But let me ask you, have you ever seen a good system or game or poker or whatever to actually get close on the what do they call it, the point system? I'm blanking on an Agile where you assign a point to a task or a story or whatever.
I kind of want to build some tools to help us with that, because Pivotal is always telling us we're wrong, and I know it's right.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you can do this much. Well, we're always wrong. We always overdo it, and they're always right. But their tooling isn't sufficient for the way it's like, oh, I'm going to use... I have some ideas that may or may not help us, but certainly will help me with how I'm trying to approach it. But which I'm hoping when I build those, I'll use ShapeUp, because at least to scope, to hammer, to get a focus on. I like this word, user interaction, from the user's point of view. And since I'll be the user of said tool, I'll know that. So I don't know. Sounds good.
That was another thing that attracted me, because earlier in the business I work at now, we tried stored points and all that, and they just felt meaningless. And
I don't know. It's meaningless. We're off. Well, and actually, we go at this. It's always meant to be this relative measure.
Yeah.
But the problem, it fails if you don't track.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have a histogram. The problem, and so Pivotal does that for you. It looks at how many points. It gives you a 3 month or a 3 iteration average of, this is kind of how much you've been doing. And I want to say that's true. Pivotal, like our velocities are true. Even though the problem that I come across is I kind of, and I don't want this to make it some sort of like big brother punitive thing. I kind of want to track individual velocity, because people move at different speeds.
Yep.
So this team velocity is no good, because whatever this abstract point is, person A does 7 and person B does 2. And not that there are any, and I'm not looking at punitive. I just want to know when I'm loading them up that I give person A 7 and I give person B 2. Right?
But couldn't that be that the estimates are wrong? especially if they're self-estimating.
Yeah. It's one of those. I feel it's just like programming. If I could profile, it's like don't pre-optimize, profile and then fix.
Yeah.
So I basically want to be able to profile everybody. So I'm not looking to fix. I'm just going to look. Hey, he said it's 7. I'm feeding him 7. The problem is when I pull in the pivotal, it just says, well, their team did 40. So no, I need to know if I'm overstacking one guy or understacking the other guy.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, I think if I stack them right, it would eventually coalesce to being the same as the team. Once I start giving the right people the right numbers, if I'm giving you this and you're finishing 80% of your cards, that's the right number. Right now, I'm just kind of mentally hoping that I remembered from last week about how many you said you could do, and I don't do a very good job of that. And so it's like, so I'm hoping to build something that helps me do that, which will help us fit. But I'm curious like this. Well, they're doing something else. Well, here we're going to hammer stuff to fit. How much do we feel this is worth? Which again, on a lot of projects, we don't have that choice. I think you might have more autonomy. Say, look, I'm willing to commit this much to this feature. I think sometimes for us, we get stuff and we got to build it. So we can't really, well, I mean, we can shape it to something, but we can't do the 6 weeks or cutoff thing. I think that's what kind of Alex was going, what? You just get rid of it? Well, yes, we don't have that option. Not for at least the stuff that is our day-to-day grind. Though we might be able to start pre-shaping things so that we can be more like that. But I also like the idea of, them looking for the rabbit holes and the unanswered questions. So shaping, I think we could benefit across the board from shaping.
Yeah.
I think for my internal projects, I could possibly do hardcore. We'll have to see as we learn. But definitely. All right. Anyone else? Alexis, how about you? How about having a chance to flex your designer muscles?
Yeah, I also thought the appetite thing was very interesting, versus how much time will this take, which is what we normally look for in the first stages of product development. You can apply this to your personal projects too. Like, I have so many ideas floating around that I'm like, oh, I don't really have time to do this. But if I just time box myself, then I might actually set aside some time and do it. Like, it's just a different way of thinking of time boxing.
Yeah.
But and I found, when I was explaining the design output, I thought, what we do as a team is, sort of already very similar to Shape Up. But I'm sure when we get down into the details, there will be some things that we can pick up on and use for our team, hopefully.
Right. I mean, we definitely try to shape. We definitely have that other channel. I think we could, I know, there's probably some values we can pull. Or maybe push some of the shaping into our stakeholders' court. We do that to some extent, but I don't know. I feel like there's a slight different connotation. I feel the way we do it is more, they throw the wish list and we just kind of frown at some things and hope they'll change.
I actually do, we get, a wish list from, say, the mass market team. And actually for HTVP, I did get rough wireframes from Rob. And then, but they're also open, so I can interpret it and apply HDS and whatnot, UI UX best practices.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we
have started to do some of
the
this.
idea of appetite. I think appetite is key. It's the sort of, okay, what is it you want and what is your appetite? And then the other part that we haven't even reached, but they talk about the pitching table and the betting. It's like we have the idea that we prioritize, but I don't think we have the same kind of granularity of pitching and betting and then appetite. I think the combination of those three things is a synergy we don't quite have. And that might be if Terry gave up her hangout spot. So if she was here, I would ask her about, well, so what do you think on this? So,
Yeah, I think she normally asks, the devs, how much time will this take versus, thinking about it, oh, how much time do we actually want to spend? But
right, but I think that question is probably not us. In our case, we ask Mass what their appetite is. What is
Yeah.
and to make them weigh things, because by the time it gets to us, it's like, well, you got to do this hopefully by this time. All right. Anyone else? Anything else? Any faces? Question, comments? Jeff, any thoughts? Because you're kind of on the shaping side of things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we do do a lot of that shaping. I didn't even know it because we do scope out things, and we've actually a lot of our stuff we've moved away from the wireframes, and we just use like bulleted scopes and maybe some technical flow charts, and then like the comp automation. There's no wireframes per se. So that's a good. It seems like it for our types of projects it works very well. I don't know if the 6 weeks, like for us in particular, would work too well. But there might be some things we want to do on less than on not maybe as much as 6, but maybe on higher than 1.
Yeah. Well, we could do that. I mean, we stick with the 1 iterations, but we could have basically some kind of like a 6-week. That's kind of what those what do we use? What's the thing that we use for this end of the sprint in Pivotal? That little marker thing. I'm going to jump over and look at my thing. What do we call that thing? We call them sprint release. What is it actually called? It's the thing that we put our sprint releases in. Forget what Pivotal calls it. Well, whatever that is, we could put those on 6-week markers. We could kind of hybridize where, we have like, and ultimately we kind of need a little bit of that. Here's your 6-week deadline. And then how we can rejigger within the iterations, arguably how we do that, which supposedly is something they're probably going to talk about, like how do we meet our 6-week deadline. So we could just still have the iterations with the weekly deploys and have that bigger frame. All right, anything else? Anyone else? If not, we can wrap. Oh, we do need to pick who's doing the next 2 chapters. Who wants to volunteer before we voluntold somebody? Anyone? They go by pretty quick, and they're kind of shapy. I mean, the next parts will all be shapy. I don't know if a shaper wants to present that. I saw Alex unmute, so I'm thinking he's leaning towards.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'll volunteer if no one's gonna.
All right, we'll do Alex.
Okay, good.
Cool. All right. I think two chapters worked on this. We had it hit about 30 minutes and then almost 30 minutes of discussion. That's probably pretty good.
Yeah, I just like the next 2 are about the same size. So.
I feel they should go pretty. A lot more words, a lot less pictures versus the last study group. So.
Sure.
All right, cool. Well, thank you. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Next week next session I'll set it up with Google Meet, and hopefully we can get more than 10 people in at one time.
Sweet.
I'll have to look into that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.